This video is going to be a little short session on how to use the basic data filtering and sorting tool in Microsoft Excel. So first things first, we have to go get some data, and I'm just going to grab some data off the web. So I want to put that on sheet 2. The data that I'm going to grab is about the CO2 emissions in a variety of countries. I already have searched for a website, and as you can see here on the screen, this is the website of the Union of Concerned Scientists. And on this particular page, they have a listing of a number of the countries and their CO2 emissions, as you can see here. So I'd like to grab this data and bring it into Excel. And one easy way to do that is to copy the URL for this page, and I'll just click in the address box. And then copy that and go back over to Excel, and in Excel on the data ribbon there's an option on the data ribbon, as you can see here, that says to get external data, and the option I want to use says from web, so I'll click that button and it opens up a web query box. The web query box basically expects you to type in or insert the URL, and I'll just go ahead and paste my URL that I copied from my web page and then press the go button, and it'll go to that particular URL. In this case, the URL does generate a couple of error messages, and so I'll just say no to both of these error messages I know I'm going to get. And here's it loads the web page, and you'll notice that there's a little note up here that's up that says click the yellow arrow next to the table you want to select, then click the import button. Well, if I click this little yellow arrow at the top, it just selects the entire page, which in some circumstances is actually pretty useful. But I want to scroll down to that little table we saw of the various countries. So I scroll down, and here's the table that we saw on that page of the country's CO2 emissions, and notice the little yellow arrow, and I highlight that, I just hover over it, and it shows me that it's going to select that table. So I'll click that little arrow, and it puts a little check mark next to it indicating that it's been selected. And that's the only table I want, so I'm going to hit the import button down here in the lower right. And then it says, where do you want to put this data? And I just want to put it on the current worksheet in cell A1, and that's the setting that it shows me here. So I'll click OK. And it goes out and it grabs the data from that web page and from that table and brings it in. Now you'll notice that it formatted things a little bit oddly here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this first column. I don't want column A. So I'll just delete that column. And then I've got a couple of rows here at the top, rows 1 and 2 for the headers. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just move that country cell down by just dragging that down. I'm going to take the per capita emissions and I'm going to drag that one down. And by just selecting it there on the edge of the cell, I get the 4-headed arrow, and then I can drag it where I want. I'm going to right click on row 1 here, and I'm going to delete that row. So now I have some nice column headers. They call these column headers. They essentially determine what these fields are of my database records. So I'm just going to go to my home ribbon, and I think I'll make those bold and put a little shading on there just to set them apart from the rest of the data set. So now I have a nice little data set here. I can scroll down and you'll notice I have 21 rows of data. This is a nice little simple data set, and if we look at the data, we'll notice that it's currently sorted from largest to smallest, which is known as an ascending sort, on the million metric tons of CO2. If we want to work with this as a data set, we essentially need to just tell Excel that this is a data set. So my recommendation is to always put your data set into cell A1 like I have here, and then make sure your cursor's on cell A1. And if we go to the data ribbon, there's this nice big button right here on the data ribbon called filter. This is a really general purpose tool, and so that's the one that you really most often will use. I'm just going to click that button, And when I click the filter button, you'll notice I get these little drop down arrows, these little arrows on each one of my column headers here. And so I'll just drop down the country and we'll see what it looks like. And that went off my screen. So let me go over here and I'll drop down the million metric tons. So the million metric tons, notice it says sort smallest to largest or sort largest to smallest. And then they have some number filters. And you can also search, or you can just say I want to see only certain things and check the little box. Let's sort this smallest to largest just to see what that looks like. And notice as we sort it smallest to largest, Ukraine then is the country with the least emissions of CO2, then Spain, and then France. An important thing to notice is that when we reorder this column, the whole row of data comes along with it. So you should consider an entire row as a single record, and this whole record stays together when we sort it. So if we wanted to see what country had the greatest per capita emissions, we could come to this column and sort it largest to smallest. And you'll notice that the country with the greatest per capita emissions is somewhat surprising, and that's Australia. I think you can probably figure out why Australia is the country with the greatest per capita, per person emissions. Notice they only have 437 million metric tons of CO2, but they are the worst emitter based on their population. That's because Australia has a pretty small population. So if we go back and look at the worst country by metric tons, let's go back and sort that largest to smallest. You'll notice that China is the worst country in terms of overall emissions, but in terms of their per capita emissions, they are really small. The United States, as you might have seen a minute ago, is quite high. And the United States has fairly high total emissions of CO2. So essentially these are a couple of quick sorting things you could do. You can also, of course, sort by country name. Let's just go ahead and sort that A to Z. And there we are, sorted alphabetically by country name. That's a very easy sort. Not very useful in this situation. Let's try something else. Let's go back and sort this by, let's say, largest to smallest. So we're back to our original order. But let's say we only want to see the top 10. So if I drop down the little selection arrow on million metric tons, there's an option here for number filters. And you might notice that the number filters then gives me a wide variety of different options here. I could say I'd like to see, greater than a certain amount, or less than a certain amount, or less than or equal to, and so on. I could also say I'd like to see the top 10. So let me go ahead and select that option. And notice it says top 10 items. Let's just go ahead and take the top 10 items and see what we get. Now before we do it though, let's look at our table of data. The top 10 we see here go from China to South Korea to Iran and Saudi Arabia. So let's see what we get when we just say top 10 items. And notice what it did. It gave me the top 10 countries listed in order of million metric tons of CO2 emissions. So that was easy. Another thing we could do under the number filters, go back down to top 10. Notice the little check mark next to it tells me that I've got that filter. So I'll go in there, and you'll notice that I could also do the bottom 10 if I wanted to. Or I could change this number and say I'd like the bottom 5. Let's see what that gives us. So here are just the bottom 5 elements remaining. Let's take one more look at that number filter. I could say, well, for instance, let's take a look at all of our data. Now you'll notice that this little drop down arrow on my million metric tons column has a different icon on it now. The little different icon, when I hover over it, tells me that I actually have a filter on that right now. And so I can drop that down, and there is an option that says clear that filter. So I can clear that filter, and that returns me to my entire data set. Let's go in and say, for instance, we want to see all countries that have greater than 1,000 million metric tons of CO2 emissions. And we know by looking that that cuts us off at Japan. So let's go in and put that filter in. So I'll go number filter, and let's say greater than or equal to. So here's the little dialog box. So greater than or equal to, and we wanted 1,000, so I'll just type 1,000 into my selection there and click OK. And then it shows me only those countries with 1,000 or greater million metric tons. So this is pretty easy to do. Let's go back and clear that filter. So doing these kinds of things are quite easy. To do a sort, or to do a selection, or to create a subset of our data. Now if you had literally thousands of records, this really turns out to be a useful tool. This is a very small data set, so it doesn't seem to be quite as useful, possibly. Now let's go ahead and do a selection of the, let's say the top, let's say the top 5. So we'll grab the top 5 for the filter. So we come down, and notice we're going to use the top 10 option here, but we're going to basically dial this number down to 5. So we want the top 5 items. You'll notice also that you could say the top 5%, but we only want the top 5 items in this case. So I'll click OK, and it gave me those top 5 items. Now, if I want to make a subset of the data on another sheet, at this point I just select the records that are visible, and I can copy those and go to my other sheet, and now I can paste those records, and I'll just choose one of the many paste options here, and it's kind of crazy, all these different paste options. I can never remember what all these paste options are, but I'm just going to go ahead and do the regular paste, and there it is. And notice I didn't get my column widths. On the home ribbon, there is an option under your paste menu. You can go in and say paste special, and you'll notice a checkbox that says column widths, and so I can paste my column widths, and now it's also got the column widths that I had on my other sheet. I'm not sure why it doesn't just do that automatically. Now if I go back to my original data set, I can turn off my filter by going to my column that I had the filter set on, so I clear the filter, and now I can see all the rest of the data. Now if I wanted to, I could do something else by saying, well, I want to get all the rest of these records from Germany down. So you're saying to yourself, okay, how can I exclude these top 5? I don't want to see those top 5. Well, if I knew how many records there were, and I indeed know that there are 20 records here because I got 21 rows of data, and one row up here is my headers, so that's 20 records. So if I don't want to see these top 5, I can go to my filter, and I'm thinking you're probably ahead of me on this. I can say, I want to see the top 10, but I want to get the bottom 15, because I have 20 records and I don't want to see the top 5. So I'm going to take the bottom 15 items. And when I'm finished, I should see Germany at the top. Germany, Canada, United Kingdom. Let's see if that happens. And indeed, that's what I got. Now, what I could do is, if I wanted to find out what the total was, million metric tons of CO2 emission from the rest of these countries, I can click at the very bottom of my data table here, and I can go to my auto sum on the home ribbon, far right, and I'll just click that auto sum button, and it's going to put a sum in, but I want you to notice it puts in something that looks quite different than just the sum function. It's putting in what they call a subtotal. This particular subtotal is only going to subtotal the visible records. The hidden ones, the top 5, will not be part of my subtotal. So if I just hit enter on that, you notice it gives me this number. So now I have this number that represents all the rest of the countries. So that's a value I can now use. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. Just copy that. And I'm going to go over to my other sheet, and I'm going to add another item on this sheet showing my countries. And I'm going to call this all the rest. And I'm going to put in this million metric tons of data value that I just created on that other sheet. So I'm going to right click. I want to paste there, but you'll notice I'm not getting the paste option here. So I'm like, okay, well that's because I typed in this text and it lost what was on the clipboard. So let's go back and do it again. Now I could put a link there, so I've got a couple options, but let's just do a copy and I'm going to paste. Now when I paste, I need to be a little bit careful. You see, notice if I hover over the original paste, it gives me a reference error. But if I come over here for pasting just the value, it does give me the correct number. So I'm going to go ahead and paste the value. So I just pasted in that value. So what I was able to do then is able to take these top 5 polluters, and then I was able to subtotal all the rest to get this number. And now if I wanted to, I could select these data values that I have here and maybe insert, let's say a pie chart. Just a standard pie chart. And so there's my pie chart. Maybe put in a title, millions of metric tons of CO2. And so there's my pie chart. I have the little legend across the bottom. I can't actually see the data values, but I don't really need to see the data values, because what we're seeing here is that the United States and China, they are about half. The other 3 countries here are quite small, relatively speaking, but then all the rest of the world looks like it's a little more than a quarter here. But it's kind of startling to think that China and the United States, in fact, if you look at China, it emits as much of all the rest of the world except for these 4 countries. So that's kind of an interesting little pie chart. So again, just to summarize, every one of these rows is considered to be a record in our data table. The elements at the top are our column headers, and we can use the data ribbon filter button to put these small little filter options on each one of our column headers, which then allows us to do some sorting and filtering of our data set in a very efficient fashion. Thank you.